looping with this launch countdown exercise here. So you should have already taken a look at the looping code page here on MDN. It's linked here at the section, which has the 3 different looping assignments that you're working on. So if you haven't read that before attempting these, I would highly recommend that. So we'll just take a quick look at the basic content. Iterate through different content. So as an example here, you can see this condition. So it says, do I have enough food? If I say yes, then I go and I cook at home. If I have no food, I can start counting. I can collect food. Do I have enough food? Yes or no? If I say no, I go back through here, collect more food until whatever the condition is that says you have enough is true, and then it says, okay, go ahead and cook at home. So loops usually have these features: a way to count. So it starts with an initial value. This is your starting point in the diagram here. I have no food. And then there's conditions, which are usually true-false tests to tell us if the loop should keep going or stop. So in this one it says, have I got enough food? Let's say they need 10 portions. So it's going to loop through 10 times until that criteria is met. So in this example here in the pseudocode, we would write something that would say loop food. I don't have any food, so I have 0 food, and I need 10. So if food is greater than or equal to the amount I need, finish. We have enough. Let's go home. Otherwise, I'm going to take food and add 2, which means they spent time collecting food, and then test the loop again. So the first loop it runs through, food is now 2, and I need 10, so 2 is not greater than or equal to food needed, so it's going to add 2 more. That's going to loop 5 times. So once we get through the 5th loop, food is going to be 10, and it says if food is greater than or equal, so 10 is equal to 10, I'm going to exit the loop. So that's one of the rough ways that works. The reasons we would use loops are numerous, and a lot of the times we're using loops because we're dealing with content or data that has more than one value. So another more concrete look at real code here is this random circle generator. This is going to start with the for loop syntax, so it's for, and then the condition. So let I equal 0, I has some either greater than, less than, greater than, equal to criteria here. So as long as I is less than 100, it's going to keep running through this loop. And so the last item here is what will happen on each loop. So we're going to add a count of 1 to each iteration. And so while I is less than 100, it's going to count up from 0. So the first loop will be 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way up to 100. While that's true, all of this content runs within the curly braces here. So it's going to start the path, it's going to fill the style, it's going to arc, random, height, width, and all that. In my experience, this page doesn't seem to work, so it's not really a great example to see the loop working. So our standards here, this is just the rough breakdown. So we have our initializer, which is I equals something. We have our range up to or down from a certain value. And then the final expression is what we're going to add or remove from each time the code loops. So here's an example of an array, which is a list of values. So we're going to have to loop through those. And what we're wanting to do is get a list of this person's cats. So we have a constant called cats. Then we say another variable here just called info, which is a string that we're going to apply to the end here. And then we're going to build this into a paragraph. So we declare this constant where we're selecting an empty paragraph tag. So then the loop starts here. So we say for, and then let I equals 0, and then as long as I is less than the length of the cat's array, keep adding 1 to our loop. So now it's going to concatenate this, and we're going to take info, which is this string, we're going to plus equals to cats. And so the plus equals is the same as saying concatenate and set info equal to what we're concatenating. So it's going to just add one value and a comma after every loop. So to address or call or find the value in the array, we, instead of putting an index number in here, we're going to put the I for the iteration of the loop in that spot. So it's going to say cats on the first run, it's going to say cats 0 here, so it's going to give us Bill, and then it's going to say plus, and then a string with a comma and a space. So this is going to build our comma separated list of cat names here. So the second time it runs, it's going to be I is equal to 1 because we said I plus plus. And so now it's going to say info is now equal to what it just was, which is my cats are called Bill, comma, space. And then it's going to append cats 1, which is Jeff, and then a comma space. And then it's going to go through and do P, Biggles, and Jasmine. So that's our rough use case of a for loop. So this is just going to explain how that's working here when we get our list. So one thing you'll notice here is that list ends with a comma, and so we can then add a little bit more logic to the core of the loop here. So instead of just adding a comma after every single one, we're going to catch that before it gets to that point. So we're going to put in an if-else statement. And this is an interesting way to do this, where the true side of the statement is really the last thing we want it to do, and the false is what we do on all the other loops through the code. So we're going to say if I is strict equality, so the 3 equals means we're looking for matching value and type of a number. And so if the loop that we're on is the length of the cats in the array minus 1, meaning we are at the end, then set info plus equals to and then concatenate the last cat with a period at the end of it. If we're not meeting this criteria, then just do the same concatenation we did before. And what that will do is, take a look at our live code here. It's going to take the last cat name and put a and name and then period at the end. So breaks. Breaks are important. The break statement will exit your loop and make the browser continue on to any other code. So breaks we want to use in those specific scenarios where we've done whatever the processing or parsing of the code needs to be, and we don't need it to loop anymore. So in this example, we've got a search input. So it's search by contact name, and we have an input, which is a text box, and then a button. And so you'll see it's got an ID called search, it's labeled, and then we have this button tag and an empty paragraph where we're going to put in the values. So we start out this code by looking at some constants that get declared here. So we have, I'll zoom in here, there we go. So we have a constant that is some names separated by colons, each as comma separated values in this list. Then we have a selector to grab that paragraph that's up here. We have a selector for the input, and then we have a selector for the button. So those are the elements that we're going to use later on in this function. So the first thing that happens in here is it adds a event listener to this button selector. So it's going to listen for click, and then it's going to run this function that ends here. And inside of this function, we're going to do a few things to prep our JavaScript for the search. So the first thing is declare the search name and set it equal to input's value. So whatever I type in, and then we're going to force it to be lowercase. So if I type in all caps like that, it's going to say not found. Let's type in Chris all uppercase because Adam wasn't a value that it was expecting. So if I type in Chris all uppercase, it's going to output Chris's number is this. So that part of the function works great to convert to lowercase. And what we want to do conversions like that for is so that our data is what we would call normalized. So whether the person enters in a capital letter for the first part of the name or just makes a typo and has 2 letters that are capitalized, we say no matter what, let's search for this value by forcing it to be lowercase in all instances. So like we've seen before, we then clear the value. We set whatever that user searched for in the input box to an empty string. And since we've already captured the value in search name as a variable. So now we put the input focus back on the search box. So if I want to search again after I do one, my cursor is already where I want it to be. So now what we're going to do is drop all of this into a loop. And we're going to run through however many contacts are in this list as our search. So the first thing it does is set the I for the interval to 0. It says as long as the loop is less than the number of names in the list, keep iterating until we find a match. So first thing we do is we say let split contact equal contacts I dot split, and this funny character here, this is our string for the colon. And so the split method is going to split that contact on each loop at the point that it reads the colon. And so it will, I believe, take the first value in that split. And so let's take a look down here where it talks about that. So conditional split the first contact at the colon character, store the resulting 2 values in an array called split contact. Okay, so it takes both values and puts them into an array where you're going to have two values. So you're going to have Chris as one value, and then you're going to have the number. So that's what's going to be stored in split contact. So then we say if split contact 0, which is the name, and we force it to lowercase, if that matches exactly as a string and a value to search name, which is what the person typed in, then we want to do the heavy lifting here in the code, and we're going to target the paragraph tag and its text content. We're going to set it equal to the array split contact 0, which is going to be the name out of this, and we're going to concatenate it and add an apostrophe s, and we're going to say Chris's number is, and then concatenate to the second value in the split, which is the number. And then we're going to end it with a period. So once it's done one loop through, it will break and stop. Otherwise, if it doesn't find a match, it's going to say contact not found, put the cursor back in the box, and you can see here, as I type in, it says contact not found. That's one of our other working ones here, Bill. So Bill's number. So this is a really nice, simple way to do a search of content that's in an array. Then, similar to break, we have continue, but instead of breaking and stopping the loop entirely, it skips to the next loop that would be taking place. So in this example, pretty much the same as before, we're looking at some math functions here. It's a text input and a paragraph for output, and the loop is just slightly different now. So what we're looking at is an input, and we say we start with 1, and so as long as the loop is less than or equal to whatever I put in, it's going to iterate, and then we're going to do some math here. So we're going to declare square root equal to the math object and set its method to sqrt, parentheses, feeding it whatever iteration we're in. So the first time we do this, it's going to say 1. If we had input 1 as our number. Then, if this is true, it's going to perform the square root as long as it's not equal to this, and then output it here. So our continue is going to let this work. Let's see, here's our output. And then here is all of the possible values of the square roots of 64. So let's read through this real quick here. The input should be a number, and the exit condition says the loop stops once the counter is bigger than the number I put in. So this is where our continue falls into place. So continue, and we'll take a look at while and do while. So for loops aren't the only loops in JavaScript. There's a lot of different types, but it's worth knowing what a while loop will do. So this is structured a little bit differently, but the concept is very similar to the for loop. So in this case, though, we set that I variable, the initializer, outside of the while loop. And the condition is going to be very similar to what we've already done. Length of something, number of items in an array. So we take a look at this. So the same cats example, we let I equal 0 outside of the loop, and it says, well, this is true, do all this stuff, and then iterate and continue looping. So this is more of a loop that runs until it runs out of things to loop. So the do while is similar. Let's provides a variation on the while structure. So again, initializer on the outside, and it says do this, and we have our final expression. And then the variation here is it has the while and the condition on the outside. So the difference here is that the condition is outside of everything else, wrapped in parentheses, and preceded by while. And in the do while, the code inside the curly braces gets run once before it checks to see if it should be run again. So let's take a look at our example here. So we let I equal to 0. We say do this no matter what, and then iterate, and then change or check to see if I has met that criteria. So it works the same, just a different way of writing the loops. So one thing here to note with while and do while, we have to make sure that the initializer is incremented, and depending on the case, de-incremented, meaning counting down, taking one away, so that the condition eventually is false. Otherwise, this is going to be an infinite loop. So we'll take a look at the launch countdown next.